In a recent talk called Mass Destruction Ahead, I spoke about military and political leaders in Europe whipping up war fever.
Taiwan has launched its largest ever war drills.
A lot of people are dying, and it should end, and I don't know, we get a lot of thrown at us by Putin, but you want to know the truth.
The Trump administration is forging ahead to end the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Japan is also arming up, boosting its defenses just miles from Taiwan's coast.
Talking about the threat of Russian aggression, telling the populace that we can expect Russia to attack us in the not too distant future. I question this narrative. Why? Why are they propagating this when there are no overt signs of Russian aggression? And even if there are, why not try to sort things out diplomatically? Take a diplomatic stance, first of all, to try to diffuse the tension. After giving that talk, it struck me that this is a classic Machiavellian tactic to divert the attention of your own people away from their grievances so they don't disturb the rulers. So what you have to do when your populace is becoming upset at the leadership, what the leaders have to do is to make up or create an outside enemy or exaggerate the threat from an actual outside enemy. When your own people are turning against you, you unite them, you bring them together by telling them that a neighboring kingdom is preparing to attack us. And if the neighboring kingdom doesn't attack you, you do some false flag and then you attack them. So this is the cure for civil unrest, to direct the aggression of the people against you, the leaders, direct it outside. I may be wrong, but it strikes me that this is Europe's policy now. By referring to Europe, I mean the European Union countries and the NATO nations, except Turkey. That's not the geographical description, but it's a political description. Europe now is facing a lot of civil disturbance, political unrest, particularly over the issue of mass immigration, which, as far as I know, no electorate ever voted for. It wasn't that the people went to the ballot box saying, yes, yes, we want thousands and millions of immigrants, bring them all in. But this policy of having huge numbers of immigrants has been instituted by European governments, or to a large extent allowed and facilitated in the form of illegal immigration. Why? Maybe the leaders can answer. Maybe George Soros can answer. Anyway, the effects of legal or illegal mass immigration are widely perceived among the masses, the plebs in Europe, and many intellectuals also, as being destructive of the European way of life, the economy of the countries, the law and order situation. And if you're going to be objective, they have a point. It's not for nothing that so many people in Europe are becoming more and more disturbed about mass immigration and expressing their disturbance in increasingly disturbing ways, protesting in the streets, voting for what are called far-right anti-immigration parties. And some parties are even talking about mass deportation, a return to the status quo ante before we had all these unwanted foreigners among us. Get back to life as it was before. Oh, it was so wonderful. So good. Let's get back to our European roots. Of course, there are problems with this narrative also. One being that there never was a time in the history of Europe or anywhere else where people in general lived idyllic lives. English people might feel some nostalgia seeing the paintings of John Constable of early 19th century English rural life. So nice to see the cows and the fields and the rivers. However, that period was a time of a lot of social unrest among the rural peasantry, who are depicted as living such nice, quaint lives. But what was actually going on, there was a lot of unemployment. Those who were employed were paid very little and treated very badly. There were lots of protests and riots and government repression and so on. Or English people might look further back to King Arthur, semi-mythical, about 1,500 years ago, who fought against all the immigrants the Anglo-Saxons, invaders. So many romantic stories about King Arthur, but would you really like to go back to 1,500 years ago? None of us could take it. Life was so tough in practically every way compared to life today. Or we may think, let's go back not so far at all to the 1970s, before all this mass immigration began. I remember growing up in the 1970s in England, and the news was bad news. Then as now, it was different bad news. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it is now, but there were youth gangs, fighting. There was a lot of social unrest, massive strikes by workers demanding higher wages, better conditions. The British economy was a mess. Then there was the whole hippie movement, which was all based on discontent and rejection of mainstream values. So, if Europeans want to kick out the invaders and go back to the previous way of life, the first question is, which previous way of life? What is that previous way of life? And is it possible to revert to that way of life at all? If you want to get back to traditional European culture, it's Christian culture. But Christianity has been largely dying in Europe over the last few decades. It seems that Christianity might be slightly picking up again, more as a response to the ascent of Islam than for any genuine spiritual reason. Or it may be said that all these horrible Africans and Asians and whatnot should integrate with our way of life. Do you really think that your way of life is so wonderful that everyone should take it up? Drinking beer, watching football, family? What's the family? There's no family. What's the family life now? Divorce. Transgenderism is forced on children. Practically no rules or inhibitions for having sex. All around moral depravity. It's a culture of superficiality, narcissism. Increasingly, no one cares about anyone else except themselves. They might all get together to throw out the immigrants. The culture is basically everyone's on their own. The present is bad. Looks like we're heading for a much worse future. Whatever happens, the weird way of life that Europeans were used to is over. Weird means W-E-I-R-D. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Is there any other alternative for the future? Is there any way forward? One thing about all this social foment is it might catalyze some deep thinking about what our lives are all about and the state of our civilization and what civilization is actually meant to be. Civilization means we should rise above the us versus them mentality, which is animalistic or tribalistic. We are all living beings. We're all on our own individual journeys. We may have different opinions and beliefs, but we're all struggling and suffering in a vast universe. We all have our own problems and insecurities and imperfections. And just remember, we're tiny beings in a vast universe. Everyone could just, in their consciousness, step back, or at least the intellectual leaders could step back from arguing this way, that way, pro-immigration, anti-immigration, pro-war. I don't hear any anti-war voices yet, and it might be too late once the nuclear missiles start flying. But anyway, apart from all these, this way, this discussion, that discussion, just start to think, well, what are we doing in this world anyway? If there is reincarnation, then quite likely, if I'm a Luxembourgian now, I was an African previously, or a Russian previously, or if I'm an African previously, I might be born in Europe the next time around and stop all the people from Africa coming in. But anyway, if we accept the reality of reincarnation, then there's no meaning to thinking in terms of us versus them, or racialism, because we're not the body that we presently inhabit. We're only temporarily within it, but it's not me, it's not you. Now, this could be a huge discussion, and it should be. It probably won't be, because spiritually most people are stupid. And that goes for all the big intellectuals in the universities also. And even many of the people who think of themselves as spiritual. And the whole of Christianity and Islam is based on the mistake of considering that we only have one life, after which most of us get chucked into hell forever. So to rectify this mistaken understanding will require much re-education And along with that has to be considered how to restructure every aspect of human society to reflect the fact that we're not just here now, but we're in one life, in a series of many lives. And that what we do now affects us on into the future. There are karmic reactions for everything we do, either good or bad. Society should be structured around these spiritual facts. Anyway, it's a huge discussion. The best place to begin is with the major knowledge tradition going back far before Christianity and Islam. The Vedic culture, based on acceptance and understanding of the reality of incarnation. The Vedic culture in modern language has morphed into Hinduism, and obviously most Hindus nowadays are not very spiritually enlightened, and like everyone else, they live their lives as if this life was all in all, more or less. So most Hindus also need re-education, or education in the implications of the reincarnation that they kind of believe in. The best place to start for everyone is by studying Bhagavad-gita, which is sometimes erroneously called the Hindu Bible. And Bhagavad-gita begins, the beginning of spiritual knowledge, it begins with an explanation of how every living being is a spiritual being different from the body. We identify with the body, right? I'm English, I'm 68 years old, I'm a male. Wrong. The body is only matter. What makes it alive is the soul, which enters into the body of a woman from the semen of a man, having been placed there by the higher authorities who oversee the workings of the universe. How this massive orchestration works of putting different living beings in different bodies to play out their karmic effects while making new karmic effects, how it all works, why it works, what are the implications of this? Again, it's a huge topic. It flies in the face of much of modern science, but again, if you want to be dispassionate, open-minded, study the facts, have a look. There's huge evidence that reincarnation is a fact. And if the scientists don't even want to look at it, they shouldn't be called scientists. Anyway, Europe is in a crisis. The whole world is in a crisis. The whole world has always been in a crisis. The crisis is, as Bhagavad-gita describes, repeated birth, death, old age, and disease. We are suffering life after life after life. Human life is meant for making a solution to the problem of repeated birth and death. The solution comes by cultivating spiritual knowledge and acting in such a way that we don't become more and more attached to this world, thinking in terms of, I am this body, this is my group, those bodies are my enemies. This way we have attachment and repulsion. Attachment to this world causes repeated birth and death, so we have to become detached from the false identity that we get by identifying with the body.